Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the Doc of Detox show. Today's show is Cancer Incorporated with Dr. Ralph Moss, PhD. You know what, everyone? Think about it. Cancer Incorporated. Cancer is a corporation. And look at this. A corporation is an entity, all right? And usually with entities, the more you feed them, the bigger they grow, and eventually they could even eat you up. So what I'm saying here is that corporations do not have a beating heart. They do not have emotions, okay? They do not have feelings, but they have a bottom line and they have an agenda. So today, this is going to be a very, very important conversation with Dr. Ralph Moss on Cancer Incorporated. Because guess what? Things can start off with good intentions, but then they become big business. Dr. Ralph W. Moss, PhD, has written and edited 12 books and 4 film documentaries on questions relating to cancer research and treatment. Dr. Moss is a graduate of New York University 1965 and Stanford University 1974. He is the former science writer and assistant director of public affairs at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. Since leaving Sloan Kettering in 1977, Dr. Moss has independently evaluated the claims of conventional and non-conventional cancer treatments all over the world. He currently writes the Moss Reports, detailed reports on the most common cancer diagnosis, and provides informational and personalized consultations for cancer patients and their families. In 2019, he wrote The Ultimate Guide to Cancer, DIY Research, to help people research their own cancers. It's about taking your power back, and this is one gentleman that is definitely going to show you that you can take your power back and show you how to keep it. Good day, Ralph. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
So, how's things going? Busy, busy?
Oh, very busy.
So, tell us about what you're up to right now and the projects you're working on.
Well, the main thing, of course, is launching of my new book, Cancer Incorporated. I'm also working with my son and my grandson, Jacob, on a documentary film about the immune treatment of cancer.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Okay, so let me ask you a question. In 1980, you wrote a book, The Cancer Industry Exposing Flaws in the War on Cancer. So, why are you writing a new book? What has changed in the past 40 years, sir?
Well, one thing obviously changed was the size of this cancer business, cancer industry. It's gargantuan today. It's $120 billion, billion with a B, which is about 1/10 of the entire global pharmaceutical market. So it's like what it was in 1980 is like a little shack compared to a skyscraper. That would be the analogy of what has happened. But more importantly, the pharmaceutical industry, which we call big pharma, 9 companies right now that dominate the cancer field, basically corrupted every aspect of the testing and approval process. So this is the main thing. When I wrote the cancer industry in 1980, there were nonprofit, governmental hospitals basically dominated the cancer scene, and things were far from perfect. But the involvement of the drug company, although it could be seen at that time, was more or less a secondary consideration. Uh, what we see today is complete, utter takeover of the cancer business by the drug industry, and this is means that they get unproven drugs to be approved by the main regulatory agencies like the Food and Drug Administration in the US, Health Canada in Canada, European Medicines Agency in Europe, and so forth. And by basically playing with the numbers or getting a confusing basis for approval, they're able to then sell drugs that either are ineffective, or if we want to be generous, unproven to be effective. And then these are approved, and then the profits flow tremendously. One drug, uh, Keytruda, had sales last year of 8.8 billion. That's again billion with a B. So in 1 year, that's the sale. That's how much they can make off of a single drug. And the price of drugs in the United States is by law cannot be negotiated by the main agencies that buy drugs, namely Medicare, Medicaid, and the Veterans Administration. By law, by a law passed at 3 a.m. by a single vote, they got this law pushed through. They had between 1,300 and 1,400 drug company lobbyists crawling around the corridors of our Congress to pressure and bribe the Congress people to pass this law, and they managed to do that. And so just think about, I mean, they can charge whatever they want, and as long as the public believes that these drugs are effective, of course their back is against the wall. What are they supposed to do? So the price on most new cancer drugs is about $150,000 per person per drug, but it can go as high as $475,000 for one infusion of a drug. And as one of the oncologists noted cleverly, he said, that's parts, not labor, meaning to administer the drug and to deal with all the side effects of these, which can be horrendous and common. It often drives the price over 1 million per patient.
Sir, do you actually think that there's any way out of this insanity? Okay. Do you?
I do.
Do you? I mean, the reality is that, you know, government was supposed to have limited power, but they have unlimited power. We have very little power, and between the us losing our power as a people, and they having all the power, and pharmaceutical companies, the profits they make, I mean, they could basically bribe anybody, you know, because there's no limit to what they can do. So coming up against this big machine, what would be the turning point to even be able, I mean, because it's got to be some kind of moral takedown here. So what would be the turning point, or what do you think could be the turning point that could ever even turn around this machine that just eats up everything in its way?
Well, it ain't going to be easy, that's for sure. At the end of my book, with the help of a very wise friend of mine, Wayne Jonas, who's a medical doctor and a administrator of a foundation, we came up with 16 recommendations for how to change this situation. But the essence of it is that cancer drugs are not like sneakers. They're not like washing machines. They are in a different category, meaning that they are a public good. You cannot have profit be the motivation for producing a cancer drug or marketing it, because that introduces a different motive entirely for why people are involved in this cancer business. So my only thought is that the government, the National Institutes of Health, should take over the cancer business. This should be off the table in terms of what they call entrepreneurial oncology, meaning exploiting cancer for profit. Will that solve every problem? Of course not. Every time you solve a problem, you also create new problems. I understand that. But twice in history, the NIH, National Institutes of Health, came very close to actually producing the drugs. They do the research on all the new drugs. They do much of the development. The drug companies add very little, and I can show you this many instances. But twice in history, with the drug adriamycin and with the drug Taxol, basically the drug companies were brought in as an afterthought. In fact, in the case of adriamycin, which is one of the most successful cancer drugs in history, basically the NCI, National Cancer Institute, had to create the company to manufacture the drug, because the drug companies didn't want to have anything to do with it. They couldn't make a sufficient profit on it, so it never happened. And similarly with Taxol, another very famous and effective form of chemotherapy, the government basically gave away after completely developing the drug with the help of different universities and medical schools. They basically handed it over to a big pharmaceutical company at a bargain basement price, and is considered one of the worst deals ever made in history. They got like pennies on the dollar for this. They would have been far better off if they had manufactured the drug and distributed it at cost to the public. This would save an enormous amount of money. The drug I mentioned earlier, Kymria, that sells for $475,000 per infusion. The inventor of the drug, Carl June, has said, and I think he's being very generous in this, that the actual cost of production of the drug is $20,000. So $455,000 of the $475,000 is pure profit, or at least goes up to the bottom line of the company. And then each of the executives of these companies gets between $20 and $30 million a year in compensation, for basically ripping off the public. So I think the time has come to, if we acknowledge the fact that cancer drugs are necessities for the public, make this a public good. And I didn't even think of this really. I mean, Wayne Jonas and I had come up with our list of recommendations when there was an article in one of the journals of the American Medical Association that basically came to the same conclusion. From somewhat different considerations, but basically that was where I got the idea last summer. Let's just call a halt to this stupid industry and just have it be a public good, and let the NCI produce the drugs. And that would include many drugs that are now in short supply because they're generic, and no drug company worth its salt wants to develop to go through the trouble of making generic drugs. So we have critical drugs like for bladder cancer and for leukemia that are either unavailable or in short supply. Most oncologists know this. Most oncologists have run into this where they have to ration drugs that are meant for the treatment of different kinds of cancer because they're simply not available in the market. Like BCG, which is a very interesting vaccine used as a cancer treatment, that drug, only one company is left to manufacture it. Why? Because they only get $200 per dose for it. It's a generic, out of patent drug. So they're not interested. They're only interested in those blockbuster drugs, the ones that make more than $1 billion a year for the company.
So, don't researchers need to take money in order to do their research, or how does that work?
So we know from U.S. government online databases, the Sunshine Act, it was called, and there's a website, Open Data, and that data that shows us who's getting money from whom. In other words, to the penny, the drug companies are required to report who they're paying, or some might say paying off, in the medical profession. So we have tremendous amount of information now about following the money, where the money goes. Okay, now it's many billions of dollars that are flowing from the drug industry to the medical profession in the United States. This is only for the United States, but some of that money goes for research. Okay, so you could say associated research. We understand because government money is scarce generally. They take the money from the drug companies to research the products of the drug companies. There are problems there too, definitely problems. What interests me though, and should interest anybody watching this, is the money that is so-called general payments. What do they mean? They mean payments that are given from the drug company right into the pocket of the researcher. And sometimes they bother to disguise this, sometimes they don't even bother, but essentially, when you see words like consultation fees or advisory boards or speaking bureaus, speaking fees, another very popular one, honoraria, to receive an honorarium, just a fancy word for money, basically, money or goods. A lot of it is like flying first class to meetings, being put up at the finest hotels, ordering the finest meals, and so forth. And we can see then who's taking the money from big pharma and who's not. There are some very fine researchers out there whose balance sheet is a couple of $100s. I have no problem with that. Uh, Jim Allison, the Nobel laureate, for instance, whom I've interviewed on my YouTube channel, uh, his balance sheet with big pharma comes to like a couple of $100s a year, one of which was a $23 meal reimbursement. Okay, that's fine. I've no problem. That's what every scientist's balance sheet should look at. By contrast, the past physician in chief at Memorial Sloan Kettering, Jose Baselga, was found to be taking $3 million from different drug companies, and then coincidentally or not, touting the products of these companies to the skies when it was not justified, and lost his job because this was exposed on the front page of the New York Times. It took something like that to finally for there be a reckoning. But he was just one person, by the way, hired, immediately snapped up by another giant drug company to be the vice president for cancer research of that big drug company within months of being fired from Sloan Kettering. So it's a very small club, but you and I are not in it, to quote George Carlin. So we know that the spectrum in terms of payments varies very greatly. What interests me, though, is drilling down into the data on particular drugs and particular clinical trials. When you look at the pattern, like how does a drug get approved? Well, they do a clinical trial at some prominent institution, and then they come up with a result. More when drug companies are involved, which they almost always are, more often positive than negative. They present this data to the FDA. FDA looks at it, says, it increases survival. That's wonderful. Who would be against increasing survival? And then they approve the drug, and we're off to the races. And the company is then advertising this on television. United States and little New Zealand are the only countries on earth that allow pharmaceutical drugs to be advertised to the general public. Okay, and so you have this very neat circle from doing the research, publishing the paper in a famous journal, going before the FDA, getting the approval because it increases survival, and then generating the sales. Well, what could be wrong with that? Well, there's a couple of things wrong. First of all, invariably, I look at thousands of papers, and it's very rare not to see that if you look in open data, that the key people, what are called the key opinion leaders of the study, are not taking money from the drug company and other drug companies, but usually from the very drug company whose product they're evaluating. Now, I live in Maine, okay, and I was called to jury duty this summer, and the panel of potential jurors was quizzed by the judge for 6 hours. So we sat there for 6 hours, and he quizzed us. We had to take written quizzes, written tests, and what was the thrust? It was, of course, to find out if there was any possible conflict of interest that we would have either in our attitudes or our pay or our connections. It's a tedious process, but they winnowed through everybody. One woman was excused from being on a case because she babysat for one of the defendants 25 years ago, and they bumped her. She hadn't seen the guy or spoken to him in 25 years. They bumped her from the panel, right? And here we have a situation, clinical trials, okay? Let's now forget about trials at law. Clinical trials where the key people, that's the first author, the second author, the final author, the senior author, more often than not, are in the pay of the company whose product they're evaluating. So how on earth can we expect there to be an objective decision made about a drug by people who are pocketing money. And I emphasize, I'm not just talking about taking money to do the research. They're taking money for themselves to put a kid through private college or private school, to get a yacht, to buy another home. They're taking tens and maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars from these drug companies. And then they're held up to be the paragons of virtue. These are the key opinion leaders who then go around and give speeches at conferences and are touting these drugs and the products of these companies. That's, to me, that's utter corruption. I have no other word for it. I mean, I think these people have basically trafficked in their reputations. And maybe some of what they say is true. Maybe they're not lying, actually. But there's a lot of ways you can spin a result short of actually lying about it. And I'll give you the most glaring example of this. I said that they seem to increase survival. Well, if you look up the word survival, I mean, you think you know what survival is, right? You're alive or you're dead. You live a certain portion of time before you pass away. It's just common sense. But in the National Cancer Institute Dictionary of Cancer, which they publish online, there are a dozen phrases, including the word survival. There's basically 12 different definitions of survival. What we lay people, non-oncologist people, think we understand by survival is the drug's going to make you or your loved one live longer, right? That they call that median overall survival. So overall survival means the period of time from the time you start the treatment to the time that you die. It's very, very simple. And if you can increase the median overall survival in some meaningful way, that's a drug that's effective within that patient population. Okay, I'm not going to go further than that, but I'll just say within the population that's tested, that drug is effective. They call that efficacy. Now, there are other kinds of survival. Progression-free survival is another kind of survival. That only means you survived, that the doctor didn't see the disease progress for 3 months or 6 months or a year. It doesn't tell you how long the patient lived. And very, very often, the drug will delay the reappearance of the disease. The disease will then recur, and the patient dies on average the same time that the patient who didn't get the drug. That's progression-free survival. No benefit. You didn't live 1 day longer. You may have even lived a shorter time, believe it or not, even though you had progression-free survival. This is the biggest scam, basically, in the evaluation of cancer drugs, because they're always showing this progression-free survival. And everybody in oncology knows that progression-free survival is not a reliable marker, or they call a surrogate marker for overall survival. So they get the drugs approved, and then they're supposed to go back and prove that it actually increased overall survival. Well, the minute they get the approval, they're making about $100 million a month off of the drug. So as long as they can go with the drug and go running, even if they then were unable later to prove that the drug didn't increase overall survival, they got all the profit of selling this ineffective drug, in the meantime. And about half the time, they never even bother. The FDA is too busy, too overwhelmed, too overworked to chase down every drug company, find out, did that drug that we approved like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, did it actually ever increase overall survival? And I only know one indication for one drug where the FDA rescinded the approval for that drug, and it created a storm of controversy. And suddenly patient groups that no one had ever heard of before popped up out of the woodwork. They call this astroturfing. Suddenly, these drugs that have dubious ties to the patient community that suddenly are holding up pre-manufactured signs and pictures of relatives and so forth at FDA meetings to demand that they continue to get access to their drug of choice. One time, 9 years ago, FDA rescinded an approval. Every other time that I'm aware of, it's just the old boy network. They just go on, they approve these drugs, and money flows and flows and flows, and the public picks up the bill for this because we have no choice.
You're absolutely right. We'll have no choice until we decide to take that back. But when you were saying earlier that, a lot of times the government doesn't have the money to do these things, I really believe that it's these big criminal businessmen that just keep a chokehold on the government anyways. I mean, you hear about money going to different countries, and you know what? Let's just put it this way. The whole money game is an illusion anyways. And the reality is that if government was humane, okay, if they had a heart, if they really cared, we wouldn't be in this mess, and everybody's getting bought off, and the whole thing is such a big mess. I think you'd have to throw all the government out and restart over, because big pharma is the cancer. And you know what? Nobody's going to take away these people's power. It's not just the money anymore, but they have power over everyone. They can take people's lives. They can manipulate people's health. And you know what? They don't have any problem getting up in the morning and kissing their kids goodbye for the day and go off to what they would call work, which I don't think work, it's actually war. And when they declared a war on cancer, I think they declared a war on people, not on cancer, because we have come no further since Nixon decided to declare war on cancer. So, I just want to ask you a question. Do you know of any drugs, any cancer drugs that were actually cured cancer?
So, what my hopes and dreams are in immune therapy. My roots in terms of understanding cancer were in immune therapy. So when I came into the field in 1974, I was greatly influenced by several people, mostly by Lloyd J. Old, who was then the vice president of Sloan Kettering. And basically, his view was if the immune system could be properly stimulated, it could and would attack cancer. He knew this because he was like in a virtual partnership with a woman named Helen Coley Nortz. And Helen Coley Nortz was an extraordinary human being whom I had the pleasure and privilege of knowing. And she was the daughter of William B. Coley. William B. Coley invented a treatment called Coley's toxins. And Coley's toxins is a mixed bacterial vaccine. It is not a vaccine against cancer per se. It's just a way of powerfully stimulating and changing the immune system with killed bacteria. And between 1893 and 1963, this treatment, Coley's toxins, was given at Sloan Kettering under the direction of the Coley family, because Coley was a head of a department at Sloan Kettering, Memorial Sloan Kettering, and thousands of people were treated. And of those thousands, approximately half of them were put into long-term remission and died of some other cause. Okay, so yes, I do believe the cancer is curable, but I think it's with exceptions, rare exceptions, it's curable through the immune system. That's the cleanest kill because it doesn't rely on giving toxic drugs. Even though the word toxins is in his treatment, but it's not toxic in the way chemo is. It basically puts the immune system into hyperdrive. And when you do that into a patient population that hasn't been decimated, whose immune systems haven't been decimated either by chemo, radiation, surgery, or the toxic environment, then yes, it is possible to, you could call it cure, to come up with cures of cancer. More recently, though, the intellectual heirs to William B. Coley, and that's James P. Allison at MD Anderson, who is head of the Coley organization, basically took it over after Lloyd Old passed away. He won the Nobel Prize in 2018 for basically discovering immune checkpoint inhibitors. And these drugs, when given in combination to people with melanoma, can actually bring about long-term remissions that are looking more and more like cures in about over 60% of that population. So this is tremendous breakthrough. At the moment, though, it mainly applies to melanoma and lung cancers. Those are the ones that are having the biggest effect. But it also is relevant to many other kinds of cancer. So I would say when your viewers and listeners consider where to go next, what to think of next in terms of cancer treatment, I would look past the chemo, even past the so-called targeted drugs and the other drugs, and look at immunotherapy, look deeply into it, because there's many aspects, many features of this. And I talk about this in my book, Cancer Incorporated.
Excellent. So, can you explain what you believe to be immunotherapy? Well, what does that entail, and what are the parameters? Are you talking about natural therapies, or are you just talking about drug therapy right now?
Well, this is on the borderline
Okay.
between natural and drug. I don't know where exactly you draw the line, because what Coley was doing was fever therapy.
Oh.
But how do you get a fever? You can get infected, but that's dangerous. You could also lose your life if you induced a disease which caused the fever. You could die of the fever, and this happened. So you can't just willy-nilly just cause fevers by infecting people. It's been done, but it's way too dangerous, and not only dangerous to the patient, dangerous to the doctor, the nurses, everybody else around them. At one time, they tried this at Memorial Sloan Kettering. They erected tents out on the lawn so that people in the hospital wouldn't become infected. But it's not practical to do that. If you give killed bacteria to people, then it becomes safer, because you're not going to infect them with the disease, but the immune system is tricked into believing that there is an infection underway. It's a big fake out of the immune system, and it can work. Or you could use immune checkpoint inhibitors, which is a very important concept. What this means is that the cancer itself is blocking the immune system. This is a very important consideration. We've known this as a society, we've known this for 100 years, but it's been learned, forgotten, until finally the fire took, and Jim Allison went on to win the Nobel Prize for this. Although, by the way, a salaried employee of a university, getting grants from government, National Institutes of Health and National Cancer Institute, entirely developed at public expense. Of course, then he has to go find a drug company to manufacture this, $150,000 per patient, per drug. So, it's not his fault, but it's just the way the system is set up. But yes, that's a drug. It's a drug. It's an expensive drug. But the basic principle is the same, namely, can you deblock the immune system? If the cancer is blocking the immune system, can you deblock it? And I go into great detail on this in Cancer Incorporated.
Beautiful. I hope you don't mind if I backtrack just a little bit, but why does the FDA approve drugs that they know that don't work? How does that even happen?
It's mostly because of pressure from Congress. And Congress is responding to the wholesale bribery through lobbying. As I said before, there's somewhere between 1,300 and 1,500 lobbyists from the drug industry working Capitol Hill at any moment. That means that there's something like 3 drug industry lobbyists for every congressperson.
3 for every congressperson.
Correct, on average.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Hey,
maybe 2.5.
Let me ask you a question, Ralph. So
Sure.
you're on the board of the FDA. Now, do you believe that somebody could actually bribe you or force you to allow a drug to go through that doesn't do what it could do. You as a person, would that happen? Do you think that could happen?
Not me. That wouldn't happen to me.
Well, then I think that
I'm a,
what they did to you.
I'm a little too battle tested for that. I could say definitely they would not get very far with me. But other people, it's not. I never heard of a case where somebody was threatened. I mean, I think their jobs, in one instance, is maybe people's job. They left soon after, this controversy with the drug industry. I don't think you'll last very long if you go against the wishes. But I do not ascribe to conspiracy theories that there's a hit squad out that's going to get you if you, go against them. But I do think, I don't have to think, I know, because we have much data on this, that the revolving door between the drug industry and the regulatory people, the FDA and other, similar agencies, that door revolves constantly. And at the very, very least, and you can look, I've looked this up, I've talked about it in Cancer Incorporated, you will double your salary if you go from FDA to become a lobbyist for a drug company. You probably go, even if you're talented, you'll go even further than just doubling it. You could go sky high, right? But at the very least, you double. So about half or 60% of the people at FDA are basically there in order to then sell out. They're not really there as dedicated employees. They're there to pick up the contacts and the knowledge. And very often they go right over to the company whose products they were evaluating. So the lobbyists for the drug industry, by and large, are former employees of FDA. They know all the secrets. They know the people very often. They certainly know the product. They know the strengths and the weaknesses. Those are the lobbyists. Those are the people speaking on behalf of the industry to another group of people who are just, half of whom are just waiting to get out of FDA, which is just the prerequisite for becoming an industry advocate. That's the corrupt system. And one of our recommendations, Wayne Jonas and I, our recommendations is to break that link and not allow, if you work for the drug industry, you're disqualified from serving in FDA and vice versa for a period of years. You can make it 5 years or 10 years, whatever works. But to break that link, in other words, to make it no longer profitable for people to sell out from their position at FDA, because that's the route to becoming a successful lobbyist in the drug field, is obviously to go work for FDA for a few years, earn your keep basically, and then you just flip. And we see this even at the highest federal level, that people high up in the current administration were drug company executives. So the same process. The head of Eli Lilly is the head of, if I'm not mistaken, of Health and Human Services, or in similar position. So this goes through and through. And lest you think I'm being sectarian here, it applies to both political parties. In fact, it may shock some people to know that Pharma actually donates a little bit more to the Democrats than to the Republicans. But neither party is in any way immune or exempt from this. This is just the utter, complete corruption of the government from top to bottom. And only by passing laws that, so-called campaign finance laws and overturning the laws that allow this to happen, are you going to get anywhere in reforming the government. Because as long as bribery, what I would call bribery, and probably you would call bribery, as long as that's perfectly legal, encouraged, and rewarded, amazingly rewarded, how are you ever going to change anything? The will of the drug industry collectively, under the name Pharma, which is actually their name for themselves, and individually, each of them doing the same thing, the 9 companies that totally, utterly dominate the cancer field. It's just nine companies that do that. Their will is basically always translated into law. And the public at this moment really doesn't have an organized spokesperson or group that can oppose them, because you have some good groups that understand this, environmental groups, sometimes AARP, American Association of Retired Persons, and you have certain candidates and politicians who individually oppose this. But the top leadership, I would say, political leadership, a lot of them are in the pocket of the drug industry. And by the way, there's another website, not to be confused with Open Payments. It's called Open Secrets. It's an ORG. It's not a government website. It's a nonprofit website. But this will show you where the money is flowing from drug companies and drug industry to which politicians. Very, very good. Both of these sites are amazing. And when I wrote Cancer Industry 40 years ago, I just would have, I couldn't dream of having the resources that we have now to understand it. But it's so deep, it's so profound, this corruption and control, that, I just don't, I always enjoy writing, and this is something like my 12th book, maybe more, but I love the process of writing. But I always know basically what I'm writing and what's going to come up, and I'm enjoying the process of enlightening the public about this, which is why we've made Cancer Incorporated free, for the moment at least, at our website at lawsupports.com/Cancer Incorporated. People can come to our website and download the book for free, because I feel that this is just life and death material. I have no right to hold this back from anybody. But what I wanted to say was, I was amazed by what I found. I was like gasping as when I read this. When I read what I myself had written, I couldn't believe what's going on right in front of our eyes. How much we are lied to, and how ingenious it is of them, because every aspect of this fakery has been finely tuned over the period of the last 40 or so years. And these people, they could hire the most brilliant graduates of the best universities to sit in think tanks and come up with unbelievable ways to increase the profit. I mean, I'll give you just one example. The drugs like Keytruda and Opdivo and so forth, these immune drugs with natural treatment, now turned into an incredibly high price commodity. I calculated that the value of the milligram of these drugs is something like 2,000 times the value of gold. This is
wow.
I mean, just imagine this. And so every milligram that they sell of the drug is incredibly valuable to them. So what they did was, like, they got the drug approved on the basis of the weight of the patient. And then they a year later, quietly, with the usual finagling that goes on with the FDA, they got that changed to a fixed amount for each patient, so that there's a lot of wastage. Instead of personalizing the treatment to the patient's weight, I should say, they got that. So now there's a lot of that drug left over from each patient. Some of it is just thrown out. And they passed a law through the FDA that you couldn't share a bottle of the stuff. The pharmacist is not allowed to just put it back, to give the amount the patient needs, put it back in the refrigerator, and give the rest of it to the next patient. This is worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the companies. Hundreds of millions. Just that one little change. And even more shockingly, and this is a very big part of my book of Cancer Incorporated, as people will realize why when they read the book, the dose of the drugs is like the most critical thing, because they give a dose that causes serious side effects in a great number of people. I mean, a high percentage of people are winding up in the either being treated in an emergency room, or else treated or hospitalized. But the data shows very clearly that it's not necessary to have such high doses. Low doses work just as well. But by manipulating public opinion and manipulating the medical opinion through the use of these key opinion leaders, they're able to convince the general public and enough of the medical profession that you have to give a high dose of the drug instead of a low dose. Well, if a tenth of the drug will work as well as the, the maximum tolerated dose, you just increased your sales by tenfold. And you didn't do anything except manipulate public opinion around what's the necessary amount of the drug. And I cite 4 studies at least, maybe more, that show there is no connection between giving a higher dose and getting a better outcome. But that one little thing, that's not little, I mean, it turns into incredible source of wealth beyond imagining. When you're dealing with such huge figures, it's, if somebody's making 10 billion a year and I want to go with a 1/10 of a dose, I'm talking about them losing 9 of the 10 billion just based upon a little change in a couple of numbers in an FDA approval statement on the label of the drug. And yet it's there, it's hiding in plain sight. The low doses work as well as the high doses, but by keeping the dose high, they keep their profits high, and they condemn thousands of people to suffer unbelievable side effects from some of these drugs. So, it's so huge that until we divorce the development and the testing and the evaluation and the approval of drugs from the corrupting influence of money, we're going to just go on suffering more and more. And we're never going to get to the bottom of this. Plus, the amount of money being discussed here with the government's proposal for what they think where oncology should go at this point, it is phenomenal. The amount of money that would be required to actually test the genes of every person, every cancer patient in the country and in the world, and then test the genes and then make new drugs for each of those genes. There are innumerable mutations in cancer. It's part of the whole nature of the cancer problem. And there are, you see different estimates, I give different estimates, but hundreds, let's say, at least, and some people say thousands of mutations in the cancer. So if you think you're going to destroy cancer or solve the cancer problem by going after each mutation that occurs, you're talking about a phenomenal amount of money. You're talking about something bigger than the entire drug industry, which is $1.2 trillion as of last year. You're going to have to come up with another equivalent sum to that. In the United States, just to do the testing would require basically thousands of dollars from each person who had to have this genetic testing done. Most people don't have that money. They don't have an extra $3,000 or something lying around. It's just not feasible. I mean, maybe this is a treatment for rich people, but we're at the community level, worldwide, forget about it. Only 5 or 10% of people in the world in general, especially like Latin America, it's been estimated only 5 to 10% of them even have insurance that would cover these drugs. So you're leaving out about 85% of the public from the supposed, wonder drugs of targeted therapy and genetic therapy.
Well, I mean, you've already stated it, sir. I mean, the whole thing is rigged. I mean, these guys are criminal. If I even did 1/100th or 1,000th of what these corporations are doing, I'd be in jail for a lifetime. They're out there, and and this is true, they're out there taking lives. And they're selling people off by the pound. And this is not going to change. I mean, the corruption between what you just said here, between the corruption with government, and you know what? I'll tell you something right now. I find it really hard to believe that the people at the top that are running this whole facade that it's hard to even believe that they could even be human beings, to be real. And then I think it's almost like this is some kind of alien movie where the aliens have come down and they're just feeding off our pain and suffering, and they're bribing all the rest of the humans to go out and torture their fellow man, fellow women, fellow children. And the whole thing, this is a horror movie. That's all this is a horror movie. And I don't think that people are going to get away from this unless we go back to nature and we really learn how to self-medicate, self-care, self-awareness, that we really get back to basics. And this is just a rabbit hole that I don't even want to go down.
Well, I'm glad I wrote the book.
I'm glad you wrote the book too, because guess what?
I,
Your book is the light. Your book is the wake up call for everyone.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many people would have to read your book to actually create a wave that would create this tsunami of change. So there it is.
Well, that's why we're offering the book in the electronic form for free, and we're offering the printed book, the paperback, for cost, basically. Free shipping, and I think it's a few bucks. It's not going to be much. We're not looking to profit off of this, because we just feel that this is the message I had to give after 45 years in this field. This is my summation. And as I said, I started out with very modest aims. It actually started, I was going to talk about clinical trials and some of the problems with, oh my God, it took over. It took over my life. I mean, the last year has been a blur, because I'm just on fire about this topic. I couldn't contain myself. And everywhere I looked, it opened up another kind of trickery. But look, as I said, they've had 40 years with the very bright people, to hone their mechanism of control. Because when there's so much money involved, you can buy brains, you can buy people to think diabolically, essentially. I've seen it happen. Yeah, I know what this is about. I've seen it with people close to me who got caught, as they say, going over to the dark side. That's the dark side of society, is these companies. And yes, of course, we need cancer drugs. We need to be developed. But you know what? We could use fewer cancer drugs at the moment. People have the totally wrong idea, because a lot of drugs exist that actually have all but the final clinical trial proof of effectiveness in cancer. There's a host of off-label drugs, repurposed drugs. Nobody wants them. Nobody's interested. They don't explore the treasure trove of already approved drugs. To get a drug approved today, it's somewhere between $650 million and $2.25 billion per drug to start from start to finish. Even the most critical observers still say it's about $650 million to develop a drug. But you know what? There are drugs out there. I mean, the most famous one being aspirin. I'm not advocating for aspirin, but I'm saying, look what happened. If it wasn't that Bayer has a virtual, dominant position in the aspirin field, we probably never would have heard again about the anti-cancer effects of aspirin. But it's, and again, there are problems with aspirin. I'm just taking that as an example, though. The generic drugs, the natural agents, the things that aren't drugs at all, treatments that are not even in the drug category, herbs, homeopathy, naturopathic treatments, all that is thrown by the wayside. And the only thing they're interested in are the drugs that are new items, new molecules that can be strongly patented, with these armies of lawyers can protect and defend the patent, and you can charge whatever you want. So what makes them able to charge $150 to $1 million? It's publicity, it's the media, it's the advertising campaigns. Pharma is one of the biggest one of the biggest supporters of the mainstream media because they're allowed to do that. That's as I said, only New Zealand, the only other country on earth that allows this kind of direct to consumer advertising, where suddenly the doctor, the oncologist, is besieged by patients demanding a drug, or at least demanding to know about a drug that they heard about in the media, some paid placement, or from an advertisement. So all of that is just the way of ginning up demand to get us not only to accept, but to demand the items being sold by this industry, the industry that has long ago put the evaluators of their own products in their pocket. It's perfect, except it doesn't. Of course, the drugs don't really work. That's the other side of this, is that the results of most of them, and I gave you a good example of something that does work in terms of immune therapy, but most of these drugs only extend, the ones that do extend overall survival, which is a small minority, only extend survival by 3 to 4 months. Wow. So what are we really talking about here? People think that they're getting cures because everything in the society would lead you to think all the hype and all the excitement and all the throwing around words like breakthrough and so on and so forth would make you think progress is just being made every day. And one of the big cancer centers has even crossed out the word cancer in their name because they think that the cure for cancer is just around the corner. We're going to erase cancer. We're going to put a big red line through the word cancer in their logo. Okay, this is not the case. Unfortunately, there are, as I say, there are hotspots. There are good things in the cancer field. I've been treated for cancer myself, and I know, first of all, the psychological stress that this engenders, which at one point made me feel, do I even want to release this information? Because I know it's going to be upsetting to some people, as it would have been upsetting to me at the time that I was actively being treated. But I just feel in balance that it's a much greater public good to let the public know in as clear terms as possible what's really going on here, because we need to have a house cleaning of unprecedented dimensions. And the only way that can happen is if the public, the broad public, understands these issues and then demands that the leadership of the war on cancer change direction. And ultimately, I'm sure that this is going to come down to a confrontation, not just over a particular drug here and there, but over actual ownership of this topic.
Absolutely. I want to ask a question, if I can just deviate just a little bit. What happens to the $650 million to $1 billion that it costs to actually get the drug approved? Who gets that?
So that money is basically going to different things. Some of it, as I said, goes to doctors who are performing the studies, and ultimately to hospitals. Performing the clinical trials has become a very important profit center for hospitals. So a lot of it is, you have to pay the hospital, let's say $50,000 or $100,000 for each patient that's included in the trial. I'm not sure of the exact figure, but I remember when I was an advisor to the NIH, it was some time ago, it was about 35,000, and I've seen 50,000 and more as the figure. But if you figure that you're going to need, let's say, 350 patients in the clinical trial, it adds up. So a lot of this money just flows right into the coffers of the hospital. It's become performing clinical trials have become a big industry in and of itself. And a lot of it goes as payments to the doctors, honoraria, as they call it, and other costs. Most of the costs of pharma, most of what they spend their money on is advertising, promotion, and even in the performing in the clinical trials, a lot of it is waste. So it isn't necessary. Most of the expenses are not necessary, but they inflate their balance sheet in order to claim that, it cost us so much money. But Carl June at University of Pennsylvania gave the game away when he showed that the $475,000 drug was actually cost $20,000, and that's expensive. That's the most expensive drug that I know of, but whatever 95% of that cost is going into the coffers of the drug company. There's nothing to do with the expense of producing the drug. It's pure earnings for the drug company.
Thank you. So everybody that's watching right now, make sure that you let, okay, your families, your friends, and everybody know about what's going on here. And I know you've got questions. I know you must have many questions, and this is the time to answer them. So make sure you put your questions down underneath on and put them on Facebook or put them on YouTube or send them in on our intercom, or you can actually ask them live, okay, on March the 13th, Friday, March the 13th. What a lucky day that'll be. At 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we'll be able to answer all your questions. Or I should say, Dr. Moss will answer all your questions. So make sure that you get the word out, and also understand something. Everybody should go and either purchase his book, okay, and start reading it, and let everybody else know. Email it to everyone that they can go online, start to read it, and if they start to enjoy it, then they should order the book. We need to get this message out, everyone. Understand this. 1 out of every 2 people will experience cancer in their lifetime. And until somebody has cancer in your family, you're just going to brush this off. Well, don't you dare brush this off, because when this comes, it comes like a tsunami of fear. And that's the last thing we want. Sir, I wanted to ask you another question. And that is you talk critically about precision medicine. Can you explain that for me, please?
Precision medicine is the government's initiative to basically test the genes of every person and every person's cancer, isolate the cancer-causing gene, and give them a drug that will counter that gene. So this is it's an attractive idea, interesting thought, but it doesn't work. It works when you have like a single mutation. We have the drug Gleevec, for instance, which targets a particular single mutation, a mix-up of some chromosomes, and a very ingenious drug thought up to attack that. And that seems to work quite well in a couple of different kinds of cancer. But cancers on the whole, on average, most cancers have many mutations. And if you block one mutation, the cancer will go down a different pathway. Each mutation is like a growth pathway. So the cancer will go down a different pathway. And then you have to block that one. And then 2 more can pop up. Somebody compared this to the arcade game Whack-A-Mole. You're whacking down one mutation and another one pops up along the way. And it's been tested now. There are some huge clinical trials underway at the National Cancer Institute, and there's others that have been published. I discussed this in Cancer Incorporated. I wish I could say that it worked better than it really does. So far, it doesn't seem as if that in itself is an adequate way of dealing with cancer. And I think I explain one possible reason why, and that has to do with cancer may not originate at the level of the genome at all. So there's a whole chapter in the book about that. It's another alternate explanation for cancer, which came up in the 1920s and has been reaffirmed in more recent years, is cancer is a disease of metabolism, not primarily of the genes. Although, yes, there are some kinds of cancer that are characterized by altered genes, and we all know breast cancer gene number 1 and breast cancer gene number 2 and so forth. So there's an interplay of the genome with cancer, but what is it fundamentally? And there's an argument to be made that cancer fundamentally is a problem of metabolism. It's not occurring in the genome. It's more in the mitochondria of the cells. And I give the argument for this because I think it's worth the average person knowing this, that even though the NCI, National Cancer Institute textbook website on cancer, the first sentence is, cancer is a genetic disease. And you'll hear this everywhere, ad nauseum, ad infinitum. But there's another school of thought, and that is that cancer is not fundamentally a genetic disease. Cancer might be fundamentally a disease of metabolism. It occurs in a different part of the cell, and that raises a whole different strategy for fighting cancer, which happens to be much simpler and more comprehensive of many different kinds of cancer, and also might lend itself to the use of repurposed or off-label drugs. So there's something to be said for that, and I felt I had to sort of explain why these genetic treatments are not working better. Because, I mean, in my heart of hearts, of course I'd want them to work. I mean, who wouldn't? If you could cure cancer by just attacking the mutations within the cancer, oh, terrific. I mean, then you got a real handle. But I think our medical establishment is in for an enormous surprise, because at a certain point, the flaws in the genomic theory will accumulate to the point where it will just collapse or be pushed over by a few influential voices, let's say. And then you have to go back to the drawing board and think, what did we overlook here? You have to wonder, because again, I'll emphasize how brilliant many people in the cancer establishment and the cancer research field are. These are incredibly talented, accomplished, brilliant people. But how far have we gotten in 40 or 50 years? Not as far as anybody. You know, we have nobody back when Nixon passed the National Cancer Act 50 years ago would have thought that 50 years later we'd be slogging along basically in a very similar place to where we were 50 years ago. And if you ask the average scientist, well, why haven't we made greater progress? The answer you're going to get is, well, we now understand cancer, and it's just a matter of sort of putting the finishing touches on the treatment. What they mean by understand cancer is we have spelled out the entire genetic alphabet soup of the cancer genome and the normal genome. So now they think it's just a matter of us plugging in the right drug to counter that mutation. Well, it's being tried. It's not working. I may have to eat these words if somebody comes up with fantastic, cures in the future, but I wouldn't bet on it. It's not looking good at all. It doesn't surprise me, because I think that they have ignored these other aspects for so long. The immunological measure, that's made a breakthrough. You realize that when I came into the field in 1974, immunology was a banned treatment. And so now Jim Allison wins the Nobel Prize last year for his breakthrough in terms of immune checkpoint drugs. So in my career, I've seen immunology come to the fore. But I think similar things are going to happen around the topic of the metabolism, the relationship of food to cancer, the relationship of sugar, in particular, blood glucose to cancer. We have powerful hints that these things are very important. But if you ask the average oncologist, well, what is the relationship between sugar and cancer? Almost invariably, and I hear this from people I've done consultations for, the doctors will tell them, oh, there is none. It's okay. You can eat whatever you want. Here's a lollipop, don't worry about it. Just go out. If you want to eat ice cream, go eat ice cream. If you want to live on Coca-Cola, go, enjoy yourself. That's I would say, unscientific survey of people I talk to. That's pretty typical of how oncologists approach the question of diet and cancer. Well, this would all have to change when you demonstrate the profound link between the way a cancer derives its energy and the progression of that disease.
I understand. I completely understand. And you know what? I totally agree with your whole theory. And it just seems to be logical. But, I think sometimes that, a lot of people have really good intentions, but then there's other people that are the puppet masters that when things were discovered, they were shelved or put in the closet or put someplace where nobody could find them. And I really think that you're going to uncover a lot of this stuff. You may not be the scientist behind all this stuff, but at least you've uncovered it so that the majority of the population now have a chance to actually take a look at the true story. So maybe we could get on the right path. Now, how can people get the Moss report, and how can they get the digital copy of your book and your book? And what other things would you like to tell people so that they can really connect with you, sir?
So we have a website, of course, Moss Reports. That's one word, MOSSREPORTS.com. And if you put in then / Cancer Incorporated or Cancer Inc., it'll bring you to a page. If you give your email address, you will get very quickly a link for a download of the digital copy of my new book, Cancer Incorporated. So, and yes, you'd have the opportunity, if you wish, to order a paperback of it, if you prefer. So that's, as far as that goes, I mean, that's primary importance. We also have reports on different cancer diagnoses. Each report is 500 pages or so in length, so these are very comprehensive on the top 30 or 40 different cancer diagnoses in the world. And so those are downloadable, orderable through our website. And I also do phone consultations for cancer patients when I'm available to do that. And there's also instructions on you can book that online, and you could reserve the particular time that you want in your time zone. So it's quite efficiently organized. And I have a blog, and I have a YouTube channel, which I think people would find interesting also. But basically, once you enter your email, you'll be hooked into our entire public output, basically.
Thank you so much, sir. So everybody, remember the deal? Okay, you've got questions. Everybody's got questions. Until you have all the answers, then we're not going to see a turnaround. So make sure that you write your questions down underneath on here on Facebook, YouTube, or Intercom on our website, or you can send them in live. Okay, you'll be able to send your questions in live when the show is on Friday, March the 13th. Okay, and it'll be 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Okay, so make sure you don't miss this. Let your family and friends know that help is on the way, and truthful, powerful information. I want to thank you, Ralph, for being with me today. You're amazing, and I've been following your work for years, and you're a true blessing, sir.
Thank you.
I can't wait until we get back together on Friday the 13th, the luckiest day of the year.
Hopefully it will be for some people.
It will be, with the information that you provide, sir. You're a lifesaver. You're a life changer. You're a game changer. Thank you for joining me on the show, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. So everybody, don't forget, let everybody know. And to all my viewers, as my gift to you, you can now email me at quickstart@docofdetox.com, and we will send you some gentle, loving steps just to get started on learning about your body and the rules of the game, okay? And everybody, just know this, that I also do my Monday Q&As, okay? So you can join us on that. And also, if you're watching YouTube, just know that you'll be able to watch Dr. Moss's show. And when we do the Q&A, it will be time-stamped on YouTube. So you can go right to the question you ask, or the question that somebody asked that you said, wow, I really want to know that. Everything will be time-stamped on YouTube. All my shows are always time-stamped on YouTube. All right? So understand something. You can also go to iTunes, Spotify, or SoundCloud if you want to download the audio as well, okay? And remember something, everybody. Okay? If you want to take your health back, you're going to have to take massive personal action, and you're going to have to become the light for your family. All right? Like I said, 1 out of every 2 people will experience cancer, but not if you change the rules. Not you want to change the reality, you're going to have to change parts of your personality. Okay? And don't forget to join us because I will be with Dr. Moss at the Legends of Health Conference in Markham, Ontario. I will be delivering 4 comprehensive lectures on Thursday, April the 30th, How to Thrive and Stay Alive on Planet Earth. On Friday, May 1st, Inflammation to Cancer, a Scar Tissue Issue. Saturday, Mind Over Medicine. And Sunday, Creating the Perfect Day for the Perfect Life. And then I will be with Dr. Moss, and we will be speaking on Sunday with the experts, okay? Panel of experts where you'll be able to ask your questions, okay? So make sure that you join us for all of these lectures, and make sure you join us for all Dr. Moss's lectures, and we'll see you on Friday, March the 13th at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time live here on Doc of Detox Show. God bless. If you're looking for life-saving and life-changing information, well, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to click and subscribe. Stay connected.